Welcome to Customer Love Stories, a podcast where we investigate why certain brands are loved or not loved by their customers. I'm your host, Robi Ganguly, CEO and co-founder of Apptentive. For those of you who don't know, Apptentive is a Seattle-based voice of the customer solution. But we're not here to talk about that. Today, we're talking about customer love with Shawn Green. Welcome, Shawn. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm Shawn Green. I'm currently the Director of Product Management at Boom Entertainment. We make apps that you may have heard of, like the NBC Sports Predictor or the Yes app for the Yankees. So it's essentially a lot of apps that help sports fans connect with the sports, follow along, make predictions, and play with each other, with their friends and family while they're watching sports.
That's super awesome. Like connecting fans and getting them more connected to their teams seems like such a natural place for us to be talking. But I don't think that's where we're going to spend most of our time right now. We're going to talk about something that you really are passionate about. So, who or what are you a fan of?
I have been a longtime fan of a little company that you guys might be aware of in Seattle, some of you at least, called Valve Software, that has the Steam digital games platform.
Yep.
They, I'm not sure if they were actually the first digital games platform, but if not, they were certainly one of the prototypical ones that a lot of people base themselves on. And they launched early on with a game called Half-Life, and then I think Steam originally launched because of Counter-Strike, one of their biggest games of all time that was massively multiplayer. But it was a way for them to deliver games to their fans without the fans necessarily having to go to the store and buy a physical copy. You could do it from the comfort of your home, and they could connect directly with their customers, right? And since they launched Steam, it has kind of become the de facto digital market. And oftentimes, when you have a de facto digital market, when you have a de facto market of any kind, that more or less functions as a monopoly, it is often the case that over time, as people start kind of losing their love affair with the company, they stop liking it as much. They start liking upstarts that are trying to rock the boat and do things differently. That hasn't really happened with Valve or with Steam. In fact, despite what I would characterize as a lot of missteps with their products, and a lot of areas where they could focus attention that they just haven't for whatever reason, people love Steam. They've always loved Steam. They've done a really good job at Valve of kind of cultivating a fandom that inspires loyalty and embraces fan engagement. I would love to talk about Steam and just I have a badge on my Steam profile that says I've been with them for I think 18 years now, which
Holy
makes me
cow.
feel old.
Yeah, so Steam, just to context set, right? Basically an app store for games that they've built existed before the mobile app stores, Google Play
Mhm.
and Apple's App Store, right? And despite the dominance of those two app stores now in the gaming sector, Steam is still very, very successful. So when you think about why you love them, what has really cultivated that customer love for you? What got you first? What grabbed you 18 years ago?
Well, I think the biggest thing 18 years ago that grabbed me was just the fact that they were doing this all, that they were trying to cut out the middle person and do what felt to me at the time, it felt like what they were trying to do was do what was right for their customer. They were trying to make things just easier in general for people to get their games. And then they slowly started adding more and more games. And then at the time, it almost felt like a cheat code to buying video games because they were having what used to be like notorious yearly annual like summer sales where they would heavily discount games. And it's to the point where I have a backlog of games in my Steam digital library that's in the thousands. And I haven't played thousands of games, mind you. I've played probably 10% of those games, but I have now thousands of games at my fingertips because I paid, a dollar or two here and there for any given one of those over the span of 18 years. And in addition to that, so this was them trying to innovate in the space of digital game delivery, and like I said, they were one of the first. But since then, they haven't necessarily stopped there. They've tried to innovate in gaming delivery or playability in a bunch of different ways. So one of the first ways they did it was they launched what was called Steam machines at the time. And just to give you a spoiler alert here, they were a massive flop. Steam machines didn't go anywhere, but that wasn't necessarily the point. And I'm not even sure if they thought that was the point. They were willing to put their money, invest their money in a very risky endeavor because it was the direction that they wanted gaming to go. And they were selling things at a loss. They were trying to make things as dirt cheap as possible for consumers so that the idea could just propagate and get out there. And in general, the idea was like, let's preload these systems where they're just made for gaming. It's almost like a console replacement, so that you can get a cheaper gaming system into people's homes. They wanted to have it be Linux based, which again, that was a contentious point at the time because not a lot of games would run well on Linux. And that was one of the issues with even people adopting them, because they would buy them and then they would end up uninstalling Steam OS, which was the default operating system that was on there, and install Windows, just so that they could play all the games that they wanted to play on these Steam machines. But that is another reason why I love Valve, is that they allow you to do that quite easily. It's not like you have, and I know there's a lot of fans of Apple, and I think there are different kinds of fans in any ecosystem. I'm more of a fan of openness, and like if I buy your product, I want to be able to do whatever the heck I want with it, right? So that's why I switched from Android to, I'm sorry, from Apple to Android within the past few years. And that's also why I've always loved Valve, because you were allowed to uninstall SteamOS, you were allowed to install Windows, do whatever you want with it. And then, since then, they also launched a Steam controller, which was, again, a very innovative idea. It wasn't like a controller that you've ever seen before. It had a decently high chance of flopping, but and it did flop as well. They've had a lot of flops, but what they've taken all of these ideas, the Steam machines, the Steam controller, which had these touchpads instead of joysticks on them, and it was haptic feedback, and it had a lot of really cool ideas baked into it. But as a package, it just didn't quite work. It didn't resonate with people.
Right.
And then what happened after all of that is they slowly but surely iterated until they came out with their new, and this is an indisputable hit, the Steam Deck, which was years in the making. And it's essentially a Nintendo Switch, but it has like all of your Steam games on it. So it's a little,
Wow.
portable
That's
gamepad.
hot.
It's lighter than you think. It's got
For
all
those of
these,
us, for those of
yeah,
you
you
listening,
can't see.
he's shown us the Steam Deck, and yeah, it does look like a super powered Nintendo Switch.
Super-powered Switch, exactly.
Yeah.
And you see here, it has these haptic feedback trackpads.
Oh,
Guess
yeah.
where those came from? The Steam controllers, which they
Right.
prototyped, in which they put their money where their mouth was and got it just right. And then they have this is entirely baked in with a Linux operating system with Steam OS. And Linux was an issue before, but they made sure with this release to do as much work as they could to have all of the emulation completely set up so that almost any game you could want to play on it, even if it wasn't officially supported in Linux, would play right off the bat. You'd install it, you'd try it, and it would just work. So they used all of these test bed products. They invested a ton of money, and they lost a ton of money in this process to try to get into people's fingertips exactly the technology that they envisioned they wanted everything to end up heading towards. And so now what I have is this new piece of hardware that runs AAA first-person shooter games at the highest quality, unlike the Nintendo Switch, which can't quite yet. And guess what? I boot it up, and I have thousands of games on it, because I've been collecting thousands of games on Steam for almost 2 decades now, like I say. Again, I hate feeling old like that, but I have to admit that I'm old now. As a counterpoint to that, and again, Nintendo has its adherents as well, just like Apple does, but they are a walled garden to a large extent. So when you have Nintendo, we have people who owned games on the Wii, then the Wii U. They've even bought digital games on the Wii U, for instance, that did not transfer to the Switch. And they've closed down their online stores, which made people lose their entire collection of games. Whereas with Steam, I trust when I buy a game on Steam, and this is part of my fandom for Valve, that I will always have access to every game that I buy here. I mean, barring extreme circumstances, right? I'm not worried about losing thousands of games. I know that it's safe and secure because I know that even at the top level, the leadership level with Gabe Newell, that he wouldn't want his company to ever get to a point where they're doing a disservice to their customers like that. And I can't say the same thing about like whoever's going to end up running Nintendo or whoever would end up running Apple in the future. Like I just
Right.
don't know what I don't have that. They haven't built that level of trust with me yet.
Right. Right. And I think that so I'm hearing really important word as a through line for what you're talking about in terms of where you are with Valve as a company, and it's trust. And it's trust that when you started to be a fan of theirs 18 years ago, they started to build because you saw them doing something that was more gamer friendly. I think that's where you started is, hey, they're really trying to make this easier. They're trying to distribute stuff that makes my life as a gamer easier. You know, it might lower the cost because I don't have to go to the store and pay for like all of the packaging around it and the distribution. They've gone direct to me. And then trust was reinforced when over time their online store also presented you with deals. So you could say, hey, you know, not only are they making it easier for me to get games overall, they're also making it cheaper for me to accumulate games that I might want to play because of these deals. And so that trust started to get reinforced in the early years. So when they started to then venture into making hardware, even if they flopped, your trust held you through that flop. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, I've basically gone through a few. Well, it's not even just. So you're totally right that they lowered the barrier of entry, both in terms of price and in terms of ease of obtaining things with making it digital. But it's not even just that. They didn't do that at the expense of quality, is I guess the point I'm trying to make. Like one of the first reasons that most people became a fan of Valve in the early days was because their games were extremely high quality.
Right.
And it's not like they had many of them, but that's also the point. Everyone's makes fun of, it's a big joke to make fun of Valve because they can't count to the number three because they always release like a really popular game and then a really, really great sequel that one-ups the next game, and then they just never touch it ever again. But I trust them to, if they're eventually going to release a third for any of their most popular franchises, it's going to be amazing too. And so you have Half-Life, which is one of the best games of all time, and then Half-Life 2 just upped the ante and made it even better. But it's not even just that. They do that in terms of their hardware as well, with regard to not only the hardware, but also the software that comes bundled with it. And not only is that software quality, but it's often free. So like when I bought a VR headset from them, they were one of the first people in the market to truly embrace gaming in VR, and they invested a bunch of money in it again. And it wasn't the perfect VR headset, but they wanted to get out there and they wanted to move the needle in that direction, and they did, and they have they've taken large strides in that direction. But it was years after I bought this VR headset, maybe even 3 years after, they launched what I considered to be one of probably the truest VR game that has been released yet. And I'm not counting games like popular ones like Beat Saber, for instance, which are, they're absolutely well done and there's a ton of fun, but that's kind of almost like a micro game. It's not a game in the traditional sense like you would think of, for instance, Half-Life, where it's a story-based game. I'd always discussed with people who wanted to try VR, okay, you can try these things, but a lot of the games that I'm going to have you play are going to kind of feel like tech demos, more or less. It's going to kind of be like, hey, isn't it cool that this is VR? Okay, now it's over because it's been an hour and you're done with this game. And that's how a lot of people were approaching VR gaming to a large extent. And in large part, it's because people were still trying to figure out how to do it. And then out of nowhere, Valve launches not Half-Life 3, but it was a game called Half-Life Alyx, which was kind of a prequel to one of their games. And it was a full game. It was 15 hours. It was a full 3D rendered, as good quality of graphics as you'd expect from a Half-Life game. And I didn't pay a cent for it. I would have. I would have paid a full price for this game. They could have sold it to anyone who had a VR headset, and no one would have even thought twice about the fact that they'd have to pay for it. They could have made tons of money. But instead, I load up Steam and I'm like, whoa, I can't even buy this. It's already here. I can just download it. Why would they do that? They would do that because it's a thank you for believing in us, is basically how I felt about it. I don't know if that's what they actually intended, but they probably intended something of that sort. And it's
Right.
also a selling point to them, like buy our VR headsets because we'll give you this free, like the epitome of a VR game with it. And it's incredible. It was one of the best experiences I've ever had playing VR. And I get the Steam Deck. And again, They have a game that's in the Portal universe. Portal is one of their other huge franchises, which again, it's only gone to Portal 2, and this isn't Portal 3. It was more of a micro game, but it was a really fun game, really polished. It had amazing voice acting, jokes that had me laughing out loud. My girlfriend had to tell me to shut up because had my headphones. She was trying to watch a show. But the cool thing about this game was it was a tutorial for your Steam Deck without feeling like a tutorial for your Steam Deck. It had you using all of the different components and the gyroscopes and the different buttons, but it felt like it was part of a universe. And so it was a polished, funny, well done, free game that was just like a welcome to this new device that you're really excited about. And that's cool fan service. That's just amazing. And that's not something that you expect from, like, you don't get a cool game when you buy an iPhone that's like, hey, let me give you a tour of your iPhone. Here's how to do it. Because with an iPhone, for instance, or even with my Android phone, I think I'm not alone in feeling like you're constantly learning new things about it that you're like, oh, I didn't even know you could do that. Well, they never explained that to me, or that's not intuitive, but I guess I'm glad to know that I can do that now.
Right.
You have to keep discovering things about it on your own. There's no handbook, there's no tutorial, there's no right place, right time contextual tour of the device. And Valve didn't want to do that. They wanted to kind of show you around and get you used to everything, so you weren't scared of the device.
That is so we start with trust, right? And with trust, they're setting up for you kind of an ethos around, like, we understand gamers so much that we're going to try and make it easier for you to get games. We're going to make it cheaper for you to try out new games. We're going to have this distribution model that is way ahead of its time, and we're going to flex. We're going to experiment with it. We're going to do a bunch of things that allow us an opportunity to learn more about what the needs are, right? What the needs are in a digital distribution world. And they get some things right and they make some mistakes. But then along the way, they start making hardware and experimenting with it. And they're not just giving you the hardware and saying, hey, here's really cool stuff we're going to sell on top of it. They're also thinking, well, with new hardware comes new patterns of how you use it and what you should expect out of a game. And so they're building your trust on top of this layer of, hey, we're going to experiment with, well, now there's new hardware and new modalities, so we're going to also show you what you can do, and we're not going to charge you for that experience. We're going to ask you, just try it out because you've invested in us. We're going to give it back to you and train you. And it sounds like to me, two things. One is, for you, it feels like fan service. That, wow, like, I'm clearly a fan. I'm bought in. I'm maybe adopting the stuff early, so I feel like by being a fan, I'm getting rewarded. But it also sets a bar for other people developing for the platform that says, hey, look what you can do, which to me reminds me a lot of Nintendo. Like, I feel like Nintendo's Marios are often used to demonstrate the capabilities of the newest system that they bring out. Like, the biggest one that stands out for me is Mario 64, which was like, oh my gosh, you can go in every single direction. And that just was like kind of a reference title for the entire platform. So, they've built on trust, but they've also started to expand the universe of what you expect as you go into new hardware. And along the way, your depth of fandom is really going much, much deeper than it could have been, if they had taken maybe more of a normal route. So you used a term called fan service that I want to unpack a little bit. Like, when you think about fan service, like, what's encompassed in that? Like, when you are a fan of something like the Steam platform, what looks like service to you?
I suppose it's when they tap into things that they know that their fans really enjoy and serve it right back to them in unexpected ways. And I don't necessarily mean in ways that you don't expect, but I mean, even sometimes at times you don't expect, or just you aren't expecting to get service at all. And I think, to the point that we were kind of making earlier, this isn't just about getting something free. This isn't just about making things easy or even making something that's high quality. When you're trying to build loyalty with a fan base, one of the really great things that Steam did was, by doing something even like giving these free games away for things that I bought years ago, they've planted the seed in my head that I just really want to patronize their business over and over again. Not because I'm expecting something later, but because I know that they will give me something later just because. Like, I don't feel like I'm trying to earn something. I just feel like every once in a while I want to back up a bit. I think really what it crystallizes into with the way that I feel about them is that this isn't a company necessarily trying to sell me something.
Mm-hmm.
This is a company so proud of what they're doing that they're like, check this out. Isn't that cool? We just want to give it to you. Thanks for like buying this VR headset. Look at this cool thing we built for it. It's like, I want you to experience that too. And I can't speak for the developers there. I can't speak for the product managers there or anyone who works at Valve, but it does often come off by virtue of like how fun and funny the Portal games are, how polished the Half-Life games are, the fact that they don't publish timelines and say that they're going to launch a game by X point. They say we're going to launch a game if and when we think it's ready to launch, and we aren't going to publicize it until then. They're giving themselves and their developers the room to breathe, the room to have fun making the products, the room to make the product that they want to make, and then sometimes to give it away just because it's really cool and they're proud of it. And they're already making a ton of money. See, that's my secret theory, is that Gabe, the CEO of the company, is a billionaire at this point, and he's just like, well, I don't need any more money, so I just want to make people like, I want to do the things that I enjoy and make people happy the way that I've always been happy when I've had a really amazing experience in gaming. And I don't know Gabe. I've never had a conversation with him, but in my head canon, that's kind of how I view Gabe. Is he's the Santa Claus for the gaming world. And as I said earlier, I don't think a company that's been around for this long and has more or less had close to a monopoly without even trying in a certain industry has had the sort of legs to keep that kind of fandom without it souring a bit. And maybe I'm in an echo chamber. Maybe I'm just seeing things from my own perspective and I haven't gotten a diverse set of experiences with Valve. But everything that I've ever seen has had almost like a deific view of Gabe, and not because he's trying to position himself that way. He's kind of a recluse, but it's like you can kind of tell that he's going to tell things the way. When I was watching interviews, for instance, when the announcement of the Steam Deck came out, he wasn't coy about anything. He was excited about it. He was telling the truth about the limitations. He just seemed like he was so happy to finally have this thing that he could give to people for honestly really cheap compared to what you're getting. And that's another thing. It felt cheap in price, but it doesn't feel cheap in quality. It's like, are they even making any money out of this? Of course, just like with Xboxes and PlayStations, where they often don't make money off of the hardware. The point is they're making money off of the software that they're selling for it.
Right.
The same could be true here, but for whatever reason, in this case, it feels altruistic. At least a certain amount of charity feels like it's involved there, just because he wants to do this, even if he breaks even on it. And I say I'm personifying the company as a single person. I don't want to get into a cult of personality sort of situation here, but like I think that ethos probably spreads because of that sort of leadership throughout the company. And I'm sure a lot of the employees at Valve feel the same way and want to spread that same sort of ethic.
Yeah. And I think that one of the themes throughout all of the stories that we've talked about with past guests, comes into this aspect of, identification with the company, that things with companies that people love, where the customer love attachment is developed, often has a lot of, oh, I feel like I fit here. I feel like they understand me. I feel like they're doing things the way I would do them if I was them, or maybe they're surprising me and I'm like, oh right. Man, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could create a whole new hardware system, release it, and then put an awesome game on there for free. But now I do. They've set this bar for me. So there's this sense of resonance that is sort of like a through line through all of these conversations. And what I'm hearing you say is, I trust them, and that trust is well placed, and they continue to fan service me in a way that makes me feel really like they get me, and they're not doing it just for money. Like, they make goo gobs of money. That's an outcome of being really good at what they do. I don't begrudge them that, which is really interesting. We can come back to this, because some companies that make a ton of money, nobody feels good about. But with them, they make a ton of money, and you're like, great, because it allows me as a fan to get more service, to get more things that I really love. But at the same time, what you're able to say is, I also don't care that I have thousands of games I've paid for that I've never played, which is, that's kind of, for a lot of these companies, some of the holy grail. They would like to be so trusted that you would just on their recommendation be willing to give them an extra dollar, give them $2 here, right? And have them say, well, it's that's what we do. We build this whole trust into our ecosystem, so people are just going to snap impulse purchase, and we can tell that to the developers on our platform, and they can trust even if we're going to discount. That what's going to happen is the aggregate demand is so much larger because of the way we operate this, right? Like this, it sort of builds on itself, and that in and of itself, to me, sounds like a moat, right? Like who else can build a digital to consumer gaming platform where you get the developers of the games to say, well, you got pricing control over what we do. You can discount it. You can do whatever. We trust you enough to do this and not just throw up their arms. So, one of the things you said at the beginning that I'm really curious about is they've made missteps along the way. And we've talked a bit about those missteps on hardware, but around distribution and development and that software ecosystem, have they made missteps? What other missteps have they
Oh,
had?
certainly. Well, I mean, as a product manager for years, when you're using a product, when I'm using Steam, I often see like they have to know that people use this in this certain way. Why aren't they making that easier? And so a lot of issues like that come up where to me, it's kind of clear that they haven't necessarily heard their customers in certain ways. So I'm not giving them carte blanche as like they're the best company ever, they can do no wrong, because they absolutely do. They make certain interactions harder than they need to be, and it could probably be fixed in a single sprint worth of work. And it just never comes up for whatever reason. I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes.
Famous
So
last words. It's just going to take a sprint.
yeah, just take a sprint. That's what you say about everything, right? But one relatively famous example of this, which is both a black mark on their reputation and also, I don't know what the difference, the opposite of black mark is a green mark, in erasure mark. One of the big missteps that they made was they decided to start charging for mods for games. So for anyone who's not familiar with the term mods, for instance, it's you can buy a game and then there's official packs that add to the game called DLC. I don't know actually what digital content like anyway, like extra features for a game, and then you also have community-based additions to games that are purely things that fans think that the game could be improved with. And so a lot of fans spend a lot of time on these mods for existing games, and some of them players of the games would consider indispensable. This makes the game so much better that it almost feels broken if you play without it. And people are such fans of games that they'll pour hours and hours into a mod. And Valve, perhaps rightly, figured, like, let's give these modders a path to make money off of their mods. And so they launched essentially a mods ecosystem where people could charge for mods. And that doesn't sound like a bad idea on its surface, but there was such an outcry from the community because there were a lot of really trash mods that were being charged for, and people felt like they were getting ripped off. So a lot of low quality mods started popping up and getting charged, like people were getting nickel and dimed for them, but also some really popular mods, the people who made them decided to start charging for them, and you couldn't use them anymore. So now all of a sudden these games that had these mods that these users were considered integral, where they were no longer able to use them. And Gabe and Valve as a company very quickly took a step back, and basically it was a massive launch for them. They had PR announcements. It was everywhere on the gaming news circles. And they rolled it back within like a week and said, we're sorry, we hear you. Mods are meant to be community driven. They're meant to be passion projects. We totally understand that some people who create mods want to get paid for their work, and they still can, but like we want this system to be free and open. And so they pulled that back. And that was a massive misstep that they probably didn't see even a little bit coming. And I didn't even see it coming. But it's just certain people have predispositions to how they feel about certain types of content, like modifications for games. And they didn't do maybe a certain baseline amount of customer validation to see like, hey, if we started doing this, how would that make you feel? Or if they did, maybe they weren't hitting the right circles. They weren't hitting a truly representative swath of their user base. I'm not sure how it came about. All I am sure about is once there was such a huge outcry, they very quickly, despite probably months and months of work and a lot of investment, ripped it right back out. And guess what? They were going to make a commission off of every sale of these mods. And they refunded everyone that paid for a mod already. And they pulled it all back out, and they just immediately lost this revenue stream because they wanted to do what was right for their customers. They weren't like, all right, let's let this die down. People will get used to it, which a lot of companies do. And
Yep.
frankly, a lot of companies are right. Like people will be angry about it for maybe months, and then they'll get over it. And I'm sure that there were internal discussions at Valve that surfaced that exact same likely reality. And yet, nevertheless, they said, no, we need to do what we think is right for the customers now. And so they pulled that back. And speaking of mods, like this transitions pretty nicely into another really great thing about Valve, which is that unlike, say, a Nintendo or a lot of other companies, frankly, where if you have a devoted fan base that's making, like, say, an unauthorized sequel to your game, um, because they love it so much and they don't think that the company is making a new sequel fast enough, or maybe the company has decided that this franchise we're just done with. And so I've seen so many beloved franchises from my childhood where you see a devoted fan base, like maybe a set of two or three developers on their own time creating this updated model within the Unreal Engine and a completely new script. And it's not reusing any of like the character names, but they wanted to continue the universe in some way as an homage. And then they get hit with a cease and desist so often. But in the case of Valve, there's been more than a few instances where fans have made a mod for a game, and and they've never intruded in it, and they've seen how popular it was, and they ended up hiring the developers who made the game and making that modification an official part of their universe. So
Wow.
I mentioned Portal earlier. The Portal series from Valve is one of their biggest series. It's critically acclaimed. It wasn't theirs. It was two random. I'm not sure if it was two. It was random developers who weren't part of Valve. They made this mod for Half-Life, and it kind of tangentially had to do with the Half-Life universe, but it was its own kind of ecosystem. And they said, "This is really cool. Can we buy this from you and hire you?" That happened there, and then Half-Life 2, someone made I'm sorry, it was actually for Half-Life 1, I believe. Someone made a mod that completely overhauled the graphics. It literally deleted certain parts of the game that players of the original game didn't like, and just everything about it was completely revamped. And it was a great mod, and they were selling it on the store, not siphoning any money to Valve. They were selling it of their own accord with Valve's blessing, until
Mhm.
finally Valve said, "This is doing really well, and we love what you've done with our beloved game. This does make our game better. We're going to make this official." And then they bought the game, and now they're selling it as a Valve game. I might even literally be I don't know if it's replacing the original Half-Life on the store, but it's a legitimate promoted option as an alternative to their critically acclaimed landmark Half-Life game. And it was made by a fan.
Wow.
And it was never once contested by Valve, to my knowledge. It was almost entirely embraced. And that's cool. That's such an amazing way to embrace your fans. You're saying you love our universe, you love what we do, and you're trying to make it better. And we love that. It goes back to what I was saying before, where it's like, to me, it feels like what they really want is to say, look what we've done. We want you to try this too. And so, as an artist of any kind, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to the idea of you put something out into the universe and someone else says, "This is really cool. And I love this so much. I want to make it a little bit better." And then you're like, "That's awesome. I love that too." If you're like a musician and you hear a really cool remix of one of your songs, usually you aren't going to think to yourself, "That sucks. I wish people wouldn't try to make money off of my songs." A lot of musicians would be like, "That's really cool. I love that someone connected with it so much and wanted to re-envision it. And that sounds cool in a different way. And I want to give it my blessing." Those are the kinds of musicians that I like more than others. When they fully embrace other people iterating off of their art because they love it so much.
And I think it's really interesting that you bring up musicians and talking about this because, unsurprisingly, talking about fans and customer love, music brings out a lot of emotions. It's come up in a couple different episodes so far, people talking about various music and genres that they liked. But there's this aspect of, a choice that bands can make. You can be the Metallica of the world, or you can be Timbaland, right? Like, Timbaland collaborates with anybody. Somebody calls him up. I have this sense that like somebody calls Timbaland and he's like, I got an idea. And he's like, immediately, yes, I'm in, right? But then you got Metallica and they'll just sue everybody for, anything that they do with their music in any distribution channel. And I
I
think,
still have a sore spot for Metallica.
right?
Still.
Yeah.
It's been decades, and I hear the name Metallica, I'm like, oh, those guys again. But then you have someone like you're talking about Timbaland. I have my Timbaland is Nine Inch Nails,
Oh,
where
yeah.
one of the core things that, or one of the fun things that like Trent Reznor did in the age of Kazaa and Napster,
Oh,
when
right.
people were downloading all this music, was he filled USB thumb drives with his own music and hid them all around concert venues, so that fans, when they're like going to the bathroom or whatever, they'd suddenly find this USB thumb drive. I mean, don't do that nowadays. That has viruses, folks. PSA. But it was such a cool idea at the time. You get this like not official. It was an unofficial bootleg from Trent Reznor trying to get around, like, I guess his publishers. He's like, I just want people to hear my music. And
Right.
Trent Reznor is also famous for releasing I forget what the tracks for his songs in all of the popular music editing formats, so that people could take them and do remixes without having to figure out like hacky ways of getting at his songs.
Yeah.
He would just release everything and say, you want to isolate my vocals? Here's the easiest way to do it. Here are the source files.
If I
That was
remember
insane to
correctly,
me.
that's how the Johnny Cash version of "Hurt" came about, right? Like it was.
Ooh, well,
I think
that's
that's
a
how.
gift to the world.
Yeah, and it's incredible, right? But I think that is basically one of the things that it was inspired by. So, for you as a fan, I'm picking up. Trust is meaningful, and then that aspect of building in fan service is important. And then for you, there's also this like free versus closed. And like as an identity for you as a fan. Now that might not be true for every fan, but for you as a fan,
And
this community, this freedom, this creation around it is like really a core component of things that you attach to. You're like, yeah, I want the world to work more this way. Is that right?
yeah, and that's exactly right. So that's why I brought up Nintendo and I brought up Apple. I actually love both companies. I'm talking to you today on a Mac computer, which I'm totally fine with. I used to own and honestly like my iPhone, but I don't like it as much as these systems that are more open.
Yeah.
I don't begrudge anyone for being a big fan of either of those companies. They put out good work. They're quality devices. They are simplified to make things more fun. And if you make something more open, that also means that it's even more possible to break,
Yep.
or for you to do something that was unintended.
Right.
So I totally get all of that. And so it's not to begrudge them, but for me as a fan, it endears me to you as a company. If you trust me, and again, the trust lends itself to the creativity. You trust me to be creative with your devices and do things that maybe weren't intended. Maybe I'll break it. Maybe I'll make it better. And so to me, the best brands are like, I trust you as a fan. I think you'll love this device. If you don't like it as is, try something new. If we like what you did with it, we're going to be happy too.
Right.
And that is a cool ecosystem that I want to be part of with any brand. And those are the brands that I tend to gravitate to.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that there's an interesting feedback loop that is inherent in this story with Valve that you've kind of highlighted in multiple places. So they've released at least 3 pieces of hardware, with the Steam Deck as the most recent launch, and it's successful. But previous 2 versions, they're flops. And then they've done a lot in order to allow creators on the community to actually gain traction, to the extent that they would say, not only did you gain traction, but we're going to bring you into the fold. And so I think it sounds to me like the Valve feedback loop is really sophisticated in terms of looking at what the community is adopting and what the community is saying. So, going back to a couple minutes when you were talking about that, when they decided to charge for mods and then they had to roll it back, why didn't they know beforehand? Were mods very popular before they rolled out the charging, or was it mods and charging came out together?
There's always been mods. There's a system within Steam called Steam Workshop, which games can basically, I believe the idea is games can opt into it, which allows people to work on those games and modify them and put not official, but they can list mods for a game within Steam Workshop for any given game on the market. And so you can install a mod in that market and it will apply to the game when you load it.
Yep.
enact any enhancements or changes that that mod for the game is meant to enact. And so that has existed for a long while. It was
Right.
more that they added a marketplace for those mods.
Got
And
it.
that was when it was this thing that used to be entirely free, and there was a lot of really great quality content on there anyway, and people were pouring a lot of hours into it because they loved these games, right? It wasn't like because they weren't charging, we were getting poor quality mods. We were getting mods like Portal, what ended up being Portal, and what ended up being this update to Half-Life. So it wasn't the real question was, why did they need to charge? It's like, okay, I get why as a company you're like, well, this is another revenue stream, and we're getting all these great mods that people are putting time into. Let's make sure that they can get rewarded for that. That all makes sense on the surface. And I frankly may have even made the same mistake. I think, like I said, the reason it misfired was because they didn't hear from the right people.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens. You can't talk to every single segment of your customer base. You can try to, cross your T's and dot your I's, but ultimately you're going to make mistakes. If you live your life as a product manager trying to never make a mistake with a release, you're going to get paralyzed and never do anything interesting or fun.
Right.
The real trick is what happens when you make a mistake.
Yep.
And like I said, they made this massive mistake that was a PR nightmare for them, at least within the gaming community, and they made it right, and they made it right really quickly. And Gabe released a statement that was very honest. And again, that was another thing too. His statement didn't sound like he sat down with his marketing team. Maybe he did, but maybe the marketing team's just that smart too. It sounded like he was like, "Ah, crap. Yeah, we didn't even think about that.
Right.
We get it. This is why we were doing it, but we totally get it. We're pulling it back."
Yep. Yep.
And
Yeah.
and that's great.
I love that. Right. And, as a feedback company, I think about this problem all the time. It's like, how much can you predict the future using feedback? And in this scenario, I'm going to guess they didn't use a ton of feedback because they probably got a sense. Well, if we just ask people if they want, you know, a car, they're going to say, no, we want a faster horse because we don't know what a car is. It's like,
Yeah.
do you want mods that have an economic marketplace around them so that we even pull more mods out of them? So, people would say yes. But if you said, hey, do you want to pay for mods? People would say no. So how do you actually ask the question of
How
your
do you ask the
customers
question?
beforehand
Right.
was part of their struggle. But as soon as they got enough feedback when they were out and the uproar was amazingly large, they were able to say quickly, our job here isn't to make massive amounts of money with everything we do. Our job here is to continue to iterate on this ecosystem we've built that is so vibrant. And what we see about this ecosystem and our hypothesis was, hey, if we put more money into it, maybe it will pull more mods out. But instead, the opposite was true. If we put more of a financial incentive around it, people feel like we're greedy and then don't want to participate as much. And that is such a subtle but important difference because everything we're trying to do is build upon our fans and say, build more stuff, mod this stuff, like encourage it. And so if this goes counter to it, well, we didn't anticipate it, but we're going to change. And I love that feedback loop at Valve is that quick and it creates confidence for you, right? And so the challenge for any product leader is, how do you make your feedback loop faster? How do you put something out today and then tomorrow learn about it? And we see this in mobile. Like, customers adopt things right away, and in mobile they're willing to talk really quickly if you show up for them. And it's like, the faster the feedback loop, the more you can adjust when you screw up. So as we're kind of wrapping up the things I've learned from you about Valve and you as a fan, I think trust is number one, ongoing fan service and delighting is number two, really thinking about that community and the ethos around it and sticking to it is number three, and then moving very quickly when you have feedback, positive or negative, right? Because the positive feedback loop they have leads them buying Portal, leads them buying and really putting more emphasis behind an unofficial Half-Life mod and making it like something more official. That positive feedback loop is also something that they move really quickly around. So that speed of the feedback loop is a piece of this that I'm hearing from you. The last question I have for you is, in your day-to-day role as a product leader, given all of these things that you participate in and learn from Valve, like, what do you do to foster, embrace, and harness fandom in what you build?
In what I built, I think one of the keys, and this is going to sound cliche from a product standpoint, but if you lead your product from a customer-centric standpoint, even when it's scary, even when it feels like I won't directly benefit from this with regard to revenue, all it's going to do is make our customers' lives easier or make them happier. That sounds weird to say all it's going to do, right? But the truth is, a lot of business decisions at companies boil down to, yeah, that will, and that'd be nice, but are we really going to spend a sprint or
Right.
2 sprints doing this thing that we will see nothing from directly? Or can we do this other thing that will literally translate into money in our pockets tomorrow? And it's very easy to get trapped in that cycle where things keep getting deprioritized that are clearly beneficial, directly beneficial to customers, but isn't going to necessarily make them spend more with you, at least not that day, right? And everyone wants to look at the long term, and they purport to look at the long term. But if they were truly looking at the long term, you'd be prioritizing a lot of those things way more heavily, so that retention is the biggest aspect of basically any product. Cost for acquisition is really high no matter what product you're looking at.
Incredibly
and
high.
the adage is, if you keep a customer, you won't have to acquire a new customer at that, to replace them. So if every dollar you spend retaining a customer is orders of magnitude more beneficial than it would be spending that same dollar trying to acquire a customer. So making a customer happy now will make them less, even these little micro friction points and micro irritations with your product makes it more and more likely day by day that they're going to be a former customer. And so if you can keep them around, and then not just that, but if you delight them even in small ways, but if you give them a free cool new VR game that they didn't have to pay for, they're going to tell their friends about it. And other friends going to want to be interested in buying games on Steam and buying a VR headset from Steam because they know that that kind of thing is possible. And so again, how much did that acquisition cost? Zero, or it cost whatever it costs you to delight that first customer. And not just that, worst case scenario, it's just like when we talk about that joke about climate change. We spent all of this money and all we did was make the world a better place. That sucks. It's like if you spend all this time and all you did was maybe break even, but make your customers way happier and retain them for longer. I know this is very fluffy, but isn't that cool? Like, isn't that the kind of product manager that we all want to be, where we're doing service to our customers? We're literally releasing things every sprint that's making people happy. And of course, we also want to affect the bottom line. That's what keeps us with jobs. That's what makes our company continue to exist. But that's not necessarily what we're the most proud of day to day, or at least not a lot of the product managers that I aspire to model myself after. It's the ones that are so passionate about making customers happy and giving them joy and keeping them as customers that everything else just kind of works itself out. And it usually will. I can't say it always will, but if you make your customers happy enough and loyal enough and evangelize you because they are so devoted to you, a lot of this other stuff will just work itself out.
Yep, I totally agree with that. I mean, you are preaching to the choir here at the Customer Love Company, for sure. I love it. So I want to thank you so much, Shawn, for joining us. This has been awesome. I've learned a whole bunch about Valve and Steam in particular. I've learned a lot about you and what makes you tick and what really earns your love. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Well, I'm always available on LinkedIn under, I believe it's Shawn Patrick Green. I mean, that's usually the best place to connect with me. I'm not a big social presence because I try to bury myself in at this point it's my Steam Deck. So yeah, just reach out to me. I would love to chat with any like-minded people.
There's a social component to Steam. Is there like a username that people who play games?
I am a solo player.
Okay, all right,
I
cool.
want invites. Don't bother me unless you want to talk product, because I love talking product. I'm actually a product nerd. All of this philosophical stuff and we're trying to do for customers and the future of products is something that I nerd out to. So I would love to talk to anyone.
Fantastic. Well, we will put the link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. As in addition, we will also be putting in the show notes some links to some of the stories that you've referenced here with respect to things that Valve has launched that have gone well and not gone well. So those resources, be sure to check them out for those of you who are listening. And finally, I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe and give us a rating and review at www.ratethispodcast.com/CLS for customer love stories, so we get some feedback ourselves on how to make this podcast valuable for all. We wish you all the best and hope you continue to deliver customer love in everything you do.